This is the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with your host, Vicki Davis.
Episode 778. How do you understand and help kids with ADHD succeed in the classroom?
Thank you, Advancement Courses, for sponsoring today's show. Stay tuned at the end of the show for a special discount to save 15% on engaging and meaningful online professional development and to hear some of the top PD topics for teachers right now. Today, we're talking with Nicole Biscotti. She wrote, I Can Learn When I'm Moving, Going to School with ADHD. And Nicole, tell us your background and experience with ADHD and ADHD students.
First of all, thank you very much for having me. This is a topic that's very close to my heart. I'm really excited to be able to share with you guys about it. My experience with this really came through my fourth child, my son, Jason. I am a teacher in the public school system. I'm a Spanish teacher. And like a lot of general education teachers, I didn't have any particular experience or training with ADHD. And Jason has really been my teacher. So that's how I began my journey of learning about ADHD.
When you started seeing your son, how did you change your own teaching? Like, what were the things that you realized, oh my goodness, I'm doing this wrong. I am misunderstanding kids with ADHD. What were those things?
Oh my gosh, there were so many things. So first of all, I would like to say that I am a pretty compliant person, and so were my first three children. So I walked around feeling like, when I had kids that misbehaved and didn't follow the rules, I just didn't understand what was going on with them, and really looking at things through a lens of why couldn't these kids just behave? Why couldn't they just sit still? And really those outdated lenses that I think a lot of us had. And then, little Jason came. I've always felt that teaching has taught me to be a better parent, and parenting has definitely informed my practice as a teacher. So here comes little Jason, and he goes to preschool, and Jason, like most ADHDers, is not going to sit down, be quiet, stuff his feelings, and be compliant. He doesn't do that. He will run around a room and throw pencils. So it was definitely a time in my life that gave me a big wake-up call about the why behind behavior.
Yeah, there have been some times I've worked with teachers and their parents, and let's just say they have perfect children, which some people do, I guess. And no children are perfect, but maybe they think they're perfect academically or whatever. And I've thought to myself, what you need a child who is gifted in other ways, because when you have a kid who has a learning difference or ADHD or whatever it is, my oldest has a learning difference, but when he went to college, he's like, I have ADHD, and he wouldn't have made it through college if he hadn't gotten that diagnosis and gotten the medicine for himself. So what are the things that you wish teachers knew and understood about teaching kids with ADHD?
And that's why Jason and I wrote a book together when he was 9 years old. It started out as his journaling, as one of the ways that he could find space between anger and action. And then I realized that we were writing a narrative, and it gave me everything that he would write. I would start researching, and then I would go to school, and I teach high school. So I used to say I would see a bunch of tall Jasons, because I was starting to be able to pick them out, not that of course I could diagnose students as a teacher, but you start to notice behaviors and see similarities. So the things that I think the bottom line that I would love for teachers to understand is that it's not their fault. They're not misbehaving on purpose, and that ADHD is a real thing. And it took me a few years. It wasn't like my son went to preschool, misbehaved, and then I understood. This was a journey. And I'm going to be honest with you that it was a journey that was difficult for Jason, because it took me a while to understand, I went through, should I be stricter? Should I be more firm with him? It was definitely an adjustment process. And it took me the child psychiatrist showing me a visual of a brain scan of a child with neurological differences and one without, for me personally to get it. ADHD is as real as any other difference that people can have, or disability, if you will.
My oldest explained it to me this way. He said, Mom, it's not that I can't pay attention. It's that I pay attention to everything and I can't focus on the one thing that I need. And he said what the medicine gave him, which he's back off it now, but what it gave him in college was, he's like, when I sit in a lecture hall, I'm seeing the person in front of me, the person to the side of me. I'm hearing the person eating chips behind me. I am taking in everything and completely unable to distinguish the professor at the front of the class from everything else. And when he explained that to me, I was like, really?
And that's something that's a very significant point, because we're taking young children, and your son at that point was older and able to express that. But we have children that are having meltdowns, and then we're actually punishing them because they won't be quiet or they won't pay attention. How can we possibly expect them to pay attention and fill out a math worksheet when they have all of this input and we're not giving them the proper support to do that? So because of our lack of understanding, and in my opinion, I don't feel that general education teachers are set up properly to understand, because if you look at teacher education, most of us haven't been educated in how to teach neurodiverse children. So we don't have the knowledge. We talk about teacher support. Yes, it would be wonderful to have another teacher in my classroom. If I don't basically understand what you're describing, I can't support a student like your son or my son.
Well, and teachers will say, I have 30 kids in here. Are you kidding me? They all need to be quiet and do what I ask. I don't have time to deal with that one for the child I'm talking about. Sometimes teachers would say, I don't have time to deal with him. I'm just going to keep him in for recess. And I'm be like, no, please don't keep him in for, I knew enough about him to know that was a terrible mistake with a kid with ADHD, isn't it?
I have had some pretty interesting, I'm going to use the word battles over Jason's recess. And sometimes I've thrown up my hands and said, well, then, ma'am, I'd like to see how your afternoon goes. Because you take a kid with hyperactivity and you limit their movement as a punitive measure. And then you're going to, see how that goes for you. And I don't mean that to be sarcastic, but let's be logical about that. And I also, I'm not just a mom, I'm also a teacher. And I do completely respect and I appreciate the need for 504s and IEPs. But I also have every year anywhere from 150 to 175 students. And I deeply care. But if you were to quiz me on all of their accommodations, I would fail miserably. I don't remember their list of accommodation, even though I care deeply. And I've thought a lot about that. And in writing my book, I thought about, well, what do we do about that? I had a lot of conversations with other educators that I really respect and admire. And I did a lot of research. And what I came up with was something that I call whole class accommodations. And there's a few key things that you can do proactively that are best practice and support all kids, but they're targeted to really reduce a lot of these behaviors and stressors for your ADHDers, because we have to remember that by the time we're dealing with, from a classroom management perspective, a disruptive behavior, that child is under stress. So there are things that we can do way before we have to look at our accommodations. And again, those are important and those are a legal right. But for example, executive functioning, particularly post-pandemic, I don't know very many kids that don't need help with executive functioning. All that means is organizing.
Organizing, making a list, write it down, right? How many times do you say write it down?
Exactly. So instead of writing it down, we can have visual cues in the classroom. We can have things like that are embedded into our lessons and in our routines that definitely are going to help our ADHDers. Because if you're a parent of an ADHDer, you know what those backpacks look like. ADHDers are notorious for that. So there are definitely things that we can do. Student choice, incorporating movement into the classroom. We can all benefit from more movement. Kinesthetic learning. I don't want teachers to feel more overwhelmed. And I definitely, as a teacher, don't want to suggest something that's more frustrating to teachers. I do believe wholeheartedly that there are whole class accommodations that help a lot of our high needs kids and that benefit all of our students.
I love that. So my mom was a teacher a good 20, 25 years ago, and always loved kids who had learning differences. Don't call them disabilities or differences, because everybody learns differently. And she always told me, when you have those kids with learning differences, go ahead and do it for the whole class, because A, you're not going to single them out, but B, all of them are going to learn better. And I really saw this in my oldest's 8th grade algebra class. For 30 years, the teacher had been teaching by writing his test on the board. Well, my son copied at least 2 of the 10 problems down wrong, sometimes 3 or 4. And then he would work the wrong problem. He would work the wrong problem the right way, but it would be the wrong problem. So it would be marked wrong. And I'm like, okay, what are you grading for here? Copying off the board wrong or knowing how to work algebra? And I had to fight to get his test on paper. And the teacher actually said, how's he going to go to Georgia Tech if he can't copy off the board? And I'm like, well, I went to Tech and I don't remember copying off the board much, but how many kids through all the years were copying off the board wrong? I mean, isn't it better just to go ahead and say, hey, hey, let's put all these tests on paper. Like, let's come to the 21st century where you can actually make a copy,
And I applaud your mom, because in my mind, she was a visionary, because she was already seeing that we do have to approach all of our students as a group. And that's something else that I address in my book, is that what about the kid that sits next to Jason? Jason fidgets almost nonstop. That could be really frustrating to somebody. He's impulsive. Now, Jason's 11 now. So he's learned, through maturity, through all the different layers of support that he's received, to control some of his impulses, a lot of them. But that wasn't the case at 6. So what about the kids around him? We've put people in the same classroom, but how are we supporting everybody in the classroom? And I feel like that's another area we need to really work on.
Well, teachers struggle. Do I put this child in the front row so I can get them closer to me and help monitor and help them learn their behavior, where it distracts the whole class? Put them on the back row where they're not going to bother anybody, but I also am not going to pay attention and help them improve. What is the answer?
And I think the answer is a conversation. I have found that conversations with kids are powerful. At one point, there was this intervention that a teacher came up with, because Jason almost never stops moving. He also has tics. So he literally has involuntary movement as well. So one teacher put a tape box around his desk, and he was allowed to move as long as he stayed in the box. I have to tell you, I hated that. I thought, what's next? So you're going to put a letter on him or something? Like, why are we marking my child? As a mom, I just didn't like that. And we went to a meeting, and he said, Mommy, I like my box, because that's the box I can move in. So I thought, oh, okay. So the next school that we went to, when we moved, he at the table, because I've always had him be in the conversations, he requested a box, and he explained to the teacher and the administrator what a box looked like. And they negotiated the space for his box. And then he didn't like where they wanted to put his box, because he said, you're putting my box very close to the door. I feel like people might walk through my box. So he wanted a different box. And I found in my classroom that those conversations with kids, because really support is a conversation, and it's something that has to evolve.
And that's fascinating, because he had boundaries is what you gave him. You gave him the ability to move within a boundary. That's interesting. And that is counterintuitive. So a message to parents might be to work in partnership with teachers and let some things happen, because I do know that there are times that I worked with kids with learning differences who I had something that I'd seen work before, wanted, again, we can't diagnose, we can ask questions, we can try things, and we can have conversations with kids. So if you have that conversation with a kid and they're like, yeah, I'd like that. And then you get ready to try it, but then mom doesn't like how it sounds. Sometimes you don't get a chance to try it,
Absolutely. And I think regarding the kid in the back, there was also another time when Jason was little that they would do like circle time on the carpet, and his teacher had him sit in a chair. And I didn't like that either, because I felt like they were singling him out. And he said, no, I like being on the chair. Nobody touches me. I like that. Because he felt like he was getting overstimulation by people knocking into him and stuff. So he preferred that. So there's been times where I'm learning about his boundaries, and I've translated that into my classroom, where with some of my students, I'll say, all right, kiddo, you're a little wiggly here. Would you like to sit in the front or the back, or what area do you think will work best for you? And sometimes you'll say, Miss Biscotti, I'm not sure. No one's ever asked me. And I'll say, well, why don't we try this for the end of the week? And then you let me know. And I feel like it's empowering, because let's be honest, kids don't grow out of ADHD, right? They mature and they learn how to cope, and hopefully they learn how to self-advocate and become self-aware, but we have to help them develop those tools.
We do. There's so many things, and we could talk about this for a very long time. So Nicole Biscotti, the book we'll link to in the show notes, is I Can Learn When I'm Moving, Going to School with ADHD, that she wrote with her son, and such an important topic. I hope this is one that we'll all share far and wide to help all of us understand the neurodiversity of our students. So thank you, Nicole, for coming on the show. Advancement Courses is who I choose for my professional development. I love their courses because they're flexible with up to 6 months to complete, and you can receive graduate credit through CAEP and regionally accredited university partners or continuing education units that meet your state requirements. I recently shared 21 top PD topics for teachers at coolcatteacher.com advancement.com/21. With over 280 courses to choose from, Advancement Courses offer subjects in everything from educator wellness to social emotional learning and more. After you pick your PD, use the code COOL15 to save 15% off when you sign up at Advancement Courses. I highly recommend Advancement Courses for your professional PD. And remember to use the code COOL15, that's COOL 15, to receive 15% off your purchase just for being a 10-Minute Teacher Show listener.
You've been listening to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast. If you like this program, you can find more at coolcatteacher.com. If you wish to see more content by Vicki Davis, you can find her on Facebook and Twitter under Cool Cat Teacher. Thank you for listening.